Okay, so depending on what mood I'm in terms of time and such, I will probably go through this brass, and instead of just putting everything into the swaging setup, what I'll do is either take my swaging punch or a go-no-go type of tool and test pieces of brass to save a little time. And I've gotten to the point where if I have this sitting in the bench, sitting in the press, and I'm just lowering it on, just by holding the brass onto the punch, I know we're good. So I wouldn't even bother with this. I would throw this back in the finished brass bin. Same thing with this particular tool, just so you can see it working. Nice and easy. No issues. But when you have a piece that's maybe not your fired brass or has a military crimp, you'll see that same head doesn't go in as easily. I could probably jam it in, but what's the point? And from utilizing this same punch, if I was to just set this on the punch, you'll see that it doesn't go all the way to the base. I could probably force it, but is it worth it compared to this piece of brass, which sets all the way at the base? So I'll set up the swaging config. In fact, I will show you as I set that up, so let me break and rearrange things. So before I set up the swager, I wanted to show you exactly why I decap without resizing. So this is the swaging rod that would go into the throat and all the way down to the base, as this puts pressure to get rid of the crimp. So what I wanted to show you was, this is a piece of resized brass, and here's the swager, and this will it'll go on, but I mean, you can see that neck is so tight that I can just leave it in there at different angles, and I would have to actually really work that in, which I'm not going to do. That's why I don't resize. Whereas if you take a piece of unresized brass that we are going to swage, and you see the difference, it makes swaging a lot easier on the hands. So although it may add another step, it simplifies things from my point of view. Okay, so this is going to be a close-up of what I do to actually set swaging up on the press. So obviously take this stuff off that I was using for decapping, shell holder and primer arm. I have the swager in the turret, and the Lee press is not meant to swage, but the RCBS is. So years ago I found a video on how to make the Lee press swage. So you essentially take off the guide rod adapter or the indexing adapter, depending on your preference. This should look familiar. This is what I was using to test my, and this one has a crimp, so this is not playing nice. So I would pop this into the shell holder. Again, these are all RCBS parts from this particular kit, and I've got too much of a close-up right now to show you. There we go. Tight space. And this comes with the swager as well. So when you think about this functionality, oh, there shouldn't be any problem. You just rotate up. But what happens is, and I'm going to use the piece of brass that, as you can see, I'm going to do this right-handed, sits in there just fine. So this particular piece of brass does not need to be swaged. But, and let's see if I can loosen this up just a little bit. And this is a very hand intensive process. I'm always going to be guiding the neck into the swaging rod, but this is what I showed you in the previous segment, where it's very easy to just guide that in, as opposed to if I were to resize this and then try to get it in, I'm fighting with it. So you'll see that nothing's happening because this piece of brass does not need to be swaged. But if it was a piece of brass that needed to be swaged, now that I'm done swaging it, let me aim this down a little more. How do I get that piece of brass that's really on that little nipple off? I mean, you can struggle with it and pop it and wiggle it and all this great stuff, and eventually you're going to get it free, but that's a lot of work. So I saw on a YouTube video many years ago, a guy went to Home Depot or Lowe's or some hardware store and bought a piece of copper in the plumbing section. It's already cut to fit. I think it was an inch diameter, inch inside diameter, and it was probably a good 2 inches tall. And then he just glued a washer on top of there. And I did that for a couple years, and it keeps breaking and separating because aluminum / zinc metal and copper don't glue well together. Try welding. I'm not a welder, so that didn't work out either. But since I had somebody online that had done some aluminum work for me in the past, I had him make this for me. And what this essentially does is it accomplishes the task of what the copper piece did, as well as what the washer on top did. And what I'll show you is this just slips on here, and it sets right there. And what it will do is, and this is the piece of brass that needs to be, whoops, the other piece, this is the piece of brass, as I was showing you before, that has, actually I think we might have swaged the piece of brass we needed to swage. So much for that demonstration. Failure in real time. So this was the piece that I was struggling to wiggle off, and what we will do, it's still got a little tightness there, what we will do is swage this and little flex to the press. But now as this comes down, as it did before I couldn't get it off the top of the punch because there was no resistance. But with this particular tool, what I can do is pop it, and because the nipple goes underneath the top of this particular piece of aluminum, the brass pops off. So with that, that's a done piece. Let me see if I can quickly find, and now that I want to do this, I probably will not be able to find a piece of brass that wasn't mine. And as you can see, all I'm doing is checking very quickly for, there's one. So that's a quick way of saying, okay, I don't have to swage these 5 to 7 pieces because they're either my brass or they don't need it. Whereas this one does. You can see that it doesn't, it won't go on. So what I'm going to do is hold it, hold the piece as I guide it into, and this is where things get fun. So you can see right there that it is not swaged. And if you were looking at the handle, you would see it, now it's swaged. So you can see that it's setting against the top of the aluminum piece, and what's going to happen now is when I bring this down, I give a pop and it's a release. That was actually a pretty good crimp on that one. So I'm not going to bother having you watch me do all 100 pieces or check all 100 pieces, but that is essentially how you turn a Lee press into a on-press swager with just some minor stuff, the RCBS kit. And if anybody's interested in one of these, I can post the link to the gentleman who custom made that. He's also the person that custom made, he works with aluminum. He's also the person that custom made one of my Hornady powder drop covers, which looks, I think I've shown this in a previous video. Does great work. Beautiful, beautiful work in aluminum. Great pricing too. All right, back for the next segment.